All right, so this is actually version 2.0 of this virtual lecture. Version 1.0 went great right up until you used a Jon Stewart clip in the YouTube video, and somehow Viacom flagged it and blocked it for copyright violations on YouTube. Um, in the video, I don't know, trying to do the video on a screen capture makes it all crazy and tinny. So um, I put the links instead of trying to do the videos with the PowerPoint. I just put the links on the Moodle website. So the point of this is talk a little bit about moral panics, talk about the framework, and give you something to go on for the AV assignment that has to do with moral panics and satanic daycare panic. So you can kind of see the framework here from Cohen. So the Gudin Ben Yehuda article talks about Stanley Cohen and the sort of classic statement of what a moral panic is, and his example of the mods and the rockers. Funny enough, the last time I taught this course face to face, we had a couple of Brits in our class, and it was pretty cool because they kind of got it more than an American would. So as near as I can tell, mods are essentially like rich, preppy kids of the time. They were the sort of wealthy folks visiting out in these seaside resort lands, and they had the rockers, which were the sort of middle to lower class folks, more likely to be delinquent. And in sort of American 60s version, it would be if you read The Outsiders or watched the movie, it would be the socias versus the greasers. So the mods over here are the rich soc kids, and the greasers would be the rockers. Um, so the scenario is Easter Sunday, and you got a bunch of kids roaming around the sort of vacation spot on the coast in England. Uh, you have a brouhaha that erupts. I think the bartender refused to serve a kid, and rumors started. And, so you had this incident. You had some delinquency, some vandalism. You had windows broken. The sort of beach huts that were destroyed. And then what happens is all the national newspapers in England pick up on this, and they start reporting. And so that sort of gets us to this, that in these reports you find in all more panics, there has to be this sort of kernel of truth that um, the public is concerned because there's some underlying story that they're ready to believe, that the kind of raw material is there. It has to hit this chord. Um, and so that's the part we'll get to in a bit. So the newspapers cover it, and the next day they have headlines like "Day of Terror" by scooter groups. So these are the dudes that rode the scooters, the mods, which stands for modernist. And what else? Scenes smeared with blood and violence, screaming mob, um, wild ones invade seaside, youngsters beat up towns, and on and on. It gets to be a national story and eventually international story as world newspapers, including the New York Times, pick it up and start to echo it and repeat it. Then you have follow-up articles, sort of the over-reporting that any similar event generates a great deal of media attention, and they attempt to link it from this to the next event. They have articles on what the police are doing to respond, what the locals think. There's editorials that start appearing in the newspaper. And so there's this rapid ramp up of media coverage and public concern. Um, in the articles, there's also a lot of hyperbole, sensationalism, orgy of destruction, screaming mobs. Um, instead of a boat being overturned, it becomes boats were overturned. Um, so so that's the sort of media involvement. Um, and then there's this sort of response from authority figures and opinion makers. So who are we talking about here? Obviously, um, authority figures would be law enforcement and politicians. And so the political response was predictable, that you had sort of politicians pandering to a concerned public and talking about, maybe passing laws to confiscate scooters to return to corporal punishment, um, and all kinds of other stuff. Law enforcement responded by, proposing things like banning mod clothing, making immediate arrests of people, even if the arrests weren't really grounded in any violation of law, like giving youth these informal rides out of town based on how they dress and how they look. This easily recognizable form is the tendency of the media to sort of stereotype. So the example I remember from the reading is this story about the mod, rich kid youth for whom fines don't matter, and so the judge fined him $75, which back in the '60s is a lot more money, and supposedly he whips out a checkbook and writes a check like it doesn't matter. As it turns out, like he said something to the effect of, "Well, I can just write a check," but the kid didn't even have a checkbook. He was just sort of false bravado. Um, so you have the media sort of hyping and exaggerating and creating sort of straw men, folk devils, stereotypes that can easily be beat up. You have this rapid buildup of public concern, lawmakers, law enforcers, and eventually, in this case, as in most moral panics, you have concerned citizens that form groups. It can be more or less formal. Um, they form groups, organizations, and try to sort of pressure politicians to pressure media to cover it a certain way. And so in this case, I think it was the local interest groups that proposed flogging and whipping with birch switches and that sort of penal discipline because obviously fines weren't working. And the last thing is that the panic kind of, as quickly as it engulfs the public, it recedes. And so in this case, after a few years, basically the style, the taste of the youth changed. There was no longer mods and rockers. That the mods sort of became something else and became interested in different music, and the rockers turned into something else, and that the whole sort of clashes between those cliques and groups fades away, and the panic recedes. And so Cohen used a sort of analogy to disasters that moral panics are similar to what can happen in an oncoming natural disaster, like a hurricane or volcano eruption, that there's this sort of warning phase. And then in the midst, there's all sort of sensationalism and rumor and panic and false alarms, and people get all worked up. And eventually that alarm subsides. So there is, I forgot I had this slide. This is all the stuff I've talked about, the over-reporting. Over-reporting, so it's very similar to what we talked about news reporting, and the Fishman example of mugging elderly people. Well, all the media starts covering it, and it makes it appear like there's a lot more of this going on. There's a spike in it that it's, so talked about that stuff. There's all kinds of examples of moral panic that have been more or less severe. So when I was in graduate school, I was in Cincinnati when the calendar turned from 99 to 2000, and there was something called the Y2K threat. And the idea was that a lot of computer code had been written with just 2 digits. So, 98, 99. And the fear was when it turned to 2000, 2001, the computers would all interpret it as 1900, 1901. And then supposedly that would throw the whole world into disorder. And so you had preppers building bunkers in their backyard and buying generators and stocking food, and a lot of people got worked up into a panic, and obviously the world didn't end. Killer bees, shark attacks. One of the keys to kind of getting these is to look for the map. There's always a map of how horrible this is and how it's spreading across the United States. So on here is how I got my my last attempt at a YouTube video thrown out. So that's the link to Jon Stewart. The other thing you see in panics is a lot of linking behavior by the media. So Drug use is so often hyped and panicked that it has its own category. So we call them drug panics, a specific form of moral panic. So, there's a marijuana panic in the early 1900s, and again in the 1960s, crack cocaine panic in the 80s, methamphetamine. And so one of the easy links is to link an old drug to a new drug. So when the media started hyping meth in the late 90s and early 2000s, they basically, meth is worse than crack. It's the new crack. It's crack on steroids, and so on and so forth. So the example it's from a Jon Stewart episode, and it's in the context of when folks were discussing legalizing marijuana, and you can check on the link, and you can check on the show and see it's a really poor attempt by a media personality to link marijuana use with texting. So, all right. So for the AV assignment, my ask is that you sort of read the Cohen stuff, you get the idea of moral panic, and then you sort of apply it to the McMartin case, and more broadly to this panic that got whipped up over satanic ritual abuse within daycare centers. And when I teach this face to face, students are always like, "What the hell? Like, how did this happen, and why Satanism?" And I don't get how this panic could happen. One of the sort of hallmarks of a panic is that in that time and context, you don't really see it. When you look back 20 years later, you can see the hype and the exaggeration and the phoniness, but when it's live, it's really hard. It's really hard to pick up. So I did, and I don't know. I don't want to risk getting this pulled, but so the 2020 and the Geraldo episodes are both online, and to get sort of how Satanism and daycare and all that stuff got sort of tied in together. The Geraldo one is the best one. So I don't even know if most of you know who Geraldo is anymore, but he was sort of a tabloid journalist. His heyday back in the late 80s and early 90s, famous for interviewing Charlie Manson and all sorts of stuff. Anyhow, in the Geraldo episode, you have a number of different things. You have the connection to, so people got preoccupied with the occult and Satanism in the 80s, and they were sort of linked and scapegoated with heavy metal music. So, Motley Crue used Pentagram for one of their album covers and flashed around a laser show. You have Ozzy Osbourne, Prince of Darkness, back before he was a live reality TV star. So you have Geraldo, he grills Ozzy Osbourne. He makes these sort of links to all the Satanist events. You got the map. If you watch it, you're going to see the map of all the satanic events and murders, and they pop up all over the map and so on and so forth. And it really, if you don't, in that context, parents and others were concerned. So the Geraldo thing was like a network TV hour and 20-minute special that was broadcast. So in the time, it was convincing and compelling. It doesn't take much to watch. We'll watch just a little bit of it. Because the other thing that's in Geraldo is they actually have the McMartin kids is tied into this. Hopefully this works. Oh, I forgot I already had it. All right. So here's just a little blurb on the McMartin kids.
Very places created to care for children in nurseries and daycare centers across the nation, there are increasing reports of ritual sexual abuse. The children of McMartin are still filled with lurid stories of their awful experience there.
What did they say the devil would do to you?
They said that if we told that the devil would come and kill our parents, and he said that we wouldn't live to be the age 9.
What were they doing to you?
Molesting me.
What is that? What is molesting you then?
Touching us in places we don't want, and then they would threaten us, oh, you don't say a word else, we're going to come to your house and kill everybody except for you, and we're going to send you to the devil and everything. And they would scare us really much.
No region in this country is beyond the reach of the devil worshippers, even here in the heartland of America.
All right, so as with other panics, they're coming to get you, even in the heartland. So obviously, when you're watching journalists interview these kids, and it looks fairly compelling. And equally, obviously, if you read the article and look at the New York Times video, it was all untrue. That it was the result of a woman with severe alcohol problems and mental illness making a report, and then this crazy sort of mix of child welfare workers that asked kids leading questions and sort of prompted them into making up crazier and crazier stories, and then the media whipped people into a frenzy. Law enforcement got involved, sent parents letters, parents got involved, and it just very quickly spun out of control. So in terms of the AV, in terms of things I want you to look for, and for those that have watched this virtual lecture, I'll give you a little something to get you started. The starting point is that there's something that's defined as a threat to the values and interests, and Cohen, as the point he made in Mods and Rocker Things, is that there has to be this sort of something there in society that makes people sort of susceptible to this particular panic, that makes them want to believe or ready to believe this. And there's a lot going on in the 80s. And the first is that you have this theme that Geraldo sort of journalistic coverage, and this belief that there's satanic cults that are spreading, and there's these secret conspiratorial things, and so a good chunk of the public that believed that this was a big issue, that they were kidnapping and murdering kids, and that nobody could figure out what was going on. So that's already out there swirling around. And then the other two things that are sort of children of the 80s, one is sort of the public speaking about child sex abuse. So, I mean, obviously it's a crime that's been around forever, but really until the 80s, nobody talked about it. It was like impolitic to talk about in terms of journalism and news reporting and other stuff. So a lot of it got glossed over. Obviously the Catholic Church has been dealing with this now for decades, when people started to expose that priests had sexually abused kids and then got moved by the parish and so on and so forth. So it's the first time media starts to cover child sexual abuse, and people are trying to yet grapple with this and figure out, like, well, how widespread is this? How many children have been abused, and who's abusing them? And so it's in the public consciousness. The second thing that happens is that the 80s, late 70s and early 80s, is the first time that women go into the labor force, even with kids, kind of full bore, and men don't come out of the workforce to help out with kids, and so it's the first time Americans start to really heavily rely on daycare and drop off their kids there and leave them there all day, and there's a certain amount of anxiety about that are we doing the right thing? Are these kids going to be harmed? Is it whether they'd be better off with one of the parents? So it's that sort of that toxic brew that's already out there, that people are anxious, that child sexual abuse is on their mind already, and you have this sort of concern about Ozzy Osbourne and Motley Crue and other, what was the big one? Oh, I can't think of it. It's not Judas Priest. Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden's got a bunch of, at the time, posters that most of the people I went to school with had in their rooms with these crazy, like, little satanic symbols and, I don't know, this sort of gruesome posters. Anyhow, so that's sort of the kind of, as I said, toxic brew that was out there that made the story more believable. The threat then being depicted in easily recognizable form. Once the media gets their teeth into the story, read The Devil Goes to Daycare. Read the article and where they talk about sort of the news media getting their teeth into the story and getting sort of whipped into a frenzy. There's a really rapid buildup of public concern. in terms of authority figures and opinion makers, man, you got law enforcement. You have these experts now that crawl out of the woodwork, that go on media to talk about, how bad the occult is, and how Satanism spread, and how nobody's paying attention, and what are the signs to see if your kid is into Satan. And you have the parent groups form. And so in the Geraldo episode, they actually have the parent group that formed as a direct result of the McMartin case. I can't remember what it was called for sure. Something like Believe the Children. You have, included in that is the child welfare workers who interview these kids using, horrible techniques and leading questions, and getting all of these sort of false memories. And so, you had this huge, very fast buildup, and unfortunately, it had consequences. McMartin, that trial, I think it was the grandmother who ran it, and her son spent years in jail, waiting trial, testifying. The matron was found, was acquitted of all the charges, but her son, it was a hung jury, and they tried him again. And you're talking about years. And in other cases, in other places, the McMartin is just one example. It flared up all over, and there was people that went to prison for a very long time because of cases like this that turned out to be false. So, all right. So check out. You don't have to watch the whole Geraldo episode, but I don't know. It's sort of interesting to watch, see the 80s, and see like all the connections that they were making, and hear the really campy, horrible theme music that they use. But the thing to keep in mind is, if you were living in that time, how believable would it have been? All right, so good luck on your AV. Check out the links that are on Moodle.